Jory and Michelle, there is growing concern for Nancy Ng's well-being. A rescuer who is helping with search efforts says he believes this case is now turning into a criminal investigation.
My biggest fear is never seeing her again, obviously. I just want her to come home.
A mystery thousands of miles away after a Monterey Park woman disappears while on a yoga retreat in Guatemala.
Now, time really flies, because I remember this case. I remember following it when it first came out, and it was just so bizarre. The characters in the stories were just so kind of unbelievable that I didn't pay it that much mind, because I kind of assumed that they were just going to find Nancy, or Nancy's just going to turn up. But I mean, we're standing here exactly 2 years later, and that just isn't the case. It really is hard to believe. I mean, that was back in October 19 of 2023 when Nancy Ng boarded a plane on what was supposed to be this dream retreat, a yoga retreat. So for Nancy, what she was signing up for was another week of sunshine, self-discovery, and of course, a whole lot of stretching, all against the beautiful backdrop of Lake Atitlán. And she was supposed to come home. She's supposed to share her stories, give her friends and loved ones souvenirs. But that never happened, because she vanished without a trace and without a lot of help, if you ask me. So the trip would abruptly end, and all that was left to remind us of Nancy is an abandoned kayak and a swirl of unanswered questions for her family, and a lot of bizarre behavior. Now, in the beginning of this story, I thought that this retreat was basically her yoga class, right? This is what they planned, but turns out I got it a little twisted, because that's not the case at all. These were not longtime friends or even people from her yoga class, but rather a gathering of individuals brought together by that retreat, and it was organized by a Los Angeles-based yoga instructor. And the characters that you will need to know we'll get to shortly. And it was these retreat goers and their alleged behavior during and after Nancy goes missing that left an uneasiness for everybody involved. And when you say that, the silence was deafening, this is the case here, because after all this time, it almost feels like we don't really know what happened that morning on Lake Atitlán to Nancy, right? The answers that we do have, for some odd reason, feels like secrets. I just want to let you guys know that this case actually does hit close to home in a way. I mean, it's obvious that she is Asian and so am I, but we both grew up in Monterey Park. Okay, now I've myself have moved from state to state since, but Monterey Park will always have a place in my heart because of that. And I mean, when I look at her picture, she could have easily been someone I went to school with and even became good friends with. And the more I learned about her, she was just a wonderful person because she comes from a wonderful family. So, I don't know. As I was going through the case, I took it kind of personally. Maybe I got more annoyed and frustrated than I needed to be. But anyways, what better way to jump into this case but to first meet Nancy.
My fear is that no one comes forward and it becomes a cold case and people stop caring and we don't find her. So
Nancy, she was born on June 28 of 1994 and grew up in Monterey Park, California. Now, she was the eldest of 4 children, and her family says that she is loving, caring, and the type of person who always, put herself first. She was the kind of person that always put others first, and they would say that even as a child, Nancy's warmth, it would stand out. Okay, she was the one who made sure her younger siblings and friends were always included, and she would bring these same values even for people that were outside of her inner circle, and even when she went to school, which of course made her a joy to be around during her school years. Teachers and classmates described her as being very bright, and of course that empathetic nature of hers really shone through. And again, always willing to help those who struggled, especially ones with, special needs. Now, in high school, Nancy excelled academically and added extracurricular activities to her repertoire. She was involved in various clubs and was known for her leadership. And she didn't rule with an iron fist. She proved to everybody that it was possible to rule with a compassion fist. And this was her reputation among her peers and teachers alike. And so after graduating high school, Nancy attended California State University, where she pursued a law degree. So definitely there was brains to go along with looks. So she chooses a career path guided by her values. It would have been interesting to see what kind of lawyer she would have become. A very ethical lawyer. Doesn't that almost sound like trying to find a four-leaf clover? So she began to work in what was called a behavioral interventionist aide, and she would work with special needs children, all in the Alhambra Unified School District. From all accounts, everyone loved her. Okay, they enjoyed her passion for life and how deeply committed she was to her students. Not only did she find it very fulfilling, to do this work, but it left a meaningful mark in her community as well. But of course, Nancy remained close to her family. Those people would always be her number one, right? So she made time to spend time with her siblings, staying active in their lives. And you will be able to tell because of how much they are invested in this case about what kind of person she was to them, right? A big sister that any of us would be lucky to have. And in saying that, I want to give a quick shout out to my own big sister. I love you. You are the rock to our family. Now, Nancy would develop, naturally, a passion for social justice and advocacy. Now, those words have been dragged through the mud, but in essence, they are good things. And on the side, she was also a fitness enthusiast. She enjoyed hiking with her family and was known for her love of travel and adventure. Now, unfortunately, mix this in with her growing love for yoga at the time, this will lead us to the heartbreaking situation we are in today that we are about to discuss. In October 2023, Nancy, she's now 29 years old at this point in the story, right? Decided to treat herself again to the second annual retreat that was to be called Be the Change. This yoga retreat in Guatemala. According to her little sister, Nikki, Nancy loved the 2022 retreat so much that she had to rebook for the 2023 trip, describing Lake Atitlán as so beautiful and expressing excitement, for those lake activities, to experience that once again. And in the days leading up to the trip, she texted her family in a group chat to wish one of her brothers a happy birthday and then informed them that she would be putting her phone on airplane mode for the duration of the trip, but she would assure them that, she will be safe and not to worry about her. This would be her last known communication with her family. So she departed from the U.S. on October 14, 2023, and she would arrive in Guatemala close to 5 hours later to begin the retreat at a hotel, Isla Verde, an eco-chic boutique hotel in the Guatemalan highlands. It had a great view of that lake. The retreat was led by Eduardo Eddie Ramada, that yoga teacher from LA we mentioned earlier. Now, he was the same organizer that organized the 2022 version, although I cannot be sure if the group consisted of the same people or just some of the same people. I just couldn't find that out. Now, this current group had at least 9 attendees. Sometimes I hear 10. Forgive me. But there's only 3 names that you pretty much have to remember in this story, okay? One would be Nancy Ng herself. 2 would be, of course, this Eduardo Ramada. And the third, keep in mind the name Christina Blazek. And she's, I guess you could say, a very peculiar character, a very interesting one in this case for sure. and she's a public defender for the San Bernardino County in California. So the other retreat goers, they have not been publicly named, and from all pictures that I could find, they are also blurred out. So I'm not sure how much they're involved in this, but their behavior is pretty peculiar as well. Details on the daily activities during the 5 days of the retreat are limited, but we do know that the retreat was sold as being designed as a week-long wellness escape emphasizing relaxation, mindfulness, and a reconnection with nature. So we could safely assume it would involve yoga sessions, group outings, and plenty of relaxation by the lake. Basically, similar experience Nancy had enjoyed the previous year. So everything proceeded as planned until the morning of October 19, when 10 members of the group, including Nancy, went out to rent kayaks from Kayak Guatemala. Okay, this was owned by Lee and Elaine Beal. Now, they weren't on the premise at the time. Lee was overseas and Elaine was just at home. And so around 10:30 a.m., they launched onto the lake. Now, we must discuss this lake. As beautiful as it is also gigantic. Okay, the dimensions and the conditions of this lake are important in this case because it's 11 miles by 5 miles with depths of up to 1,100 feet. It is also known for strong currents, although it's said to be calm in the morning and perfect for kayaking. There is this rare footage here that captures Nancy smiling and waving from her kayak just before 11 a.m. Now, there is this thing regarding life jackets, and I don't know why, okay? But the details of something this simplistic is fuzzy, probably for legal reasons or whatnot. The Beals claimed that the group declined this, while Ramada and Blazek's attorney assert that they were never offered these vests, nor any safety instructions or any precautions at all, which honestly sounds absurd. Like a kayak rental business that's been in business for, I assume, at least a few years would know that they're not sending anybody out on their kayaks without a vest. But here we are. They were out there without vests. Now, a police report notes that the Beals were not even on site, like I mentioned before, right? When all this was going down, muddying the waters, so to speak, because these people weren't even there. They're just going by what their employees told them. The employees don't want to risk their job, so they could lie. Maybe they just took no for an answer. And so sometime after launching, okay, Nancy and Blazek, they become separated from the main group. And of course, this can only be accounted by either Blazek or the group. And some accounts differ on how this happened, but it did happen. Now, they would say that the kayaks unintentionally drifted apart due to wind and currents, while others speculate that they deliberately paddled away, perhaps to explore more or talk privately, though no definitive evidence supports either scenario. Blazek, in a statement provided through her attorney on November 14, nearly a month after the incident, told Guatemalan investigators that Nancy expressed a desire to swim in the lake, in the deep central part of the water. Now, despite Blazek's warnings about hazardous conditions, including choppy waters and currents driven by the escalating Shocomil winds, okay? Now, the fact that Blazek even knows about these Shokomo winds shows her lawyer side, I guess you could say, right? That she was prepared by reading about this lake. And so this Shocomil wind is a local wind that blew across Lake Atitlán. And the alarming feature of this wind is that it would suddenly transform calm morning waters into turbulent noon choppy waves, 1 to 3 feet, and create these strong currents. Basically a disaster if you were caught in one of these. The rough translation from the Mayan language of Xocomil is the wind that carries away sins, which is just ominous. According to Blazek, Nancy jumped into the water, pushing her kayak away in the process. Blazek attempted to retrieve Nancy's drifting kayak by pretty much straddling both with her legs, which of course is a precarious maneuver, in order to keep them together. Now, when she turned back moments later, Nancy had vanished. She had never resurfaced. Blazek never heard her calling out. There was just no trace. I did my research on these winds. In the past, it has capsized numerous boats, people that were just out on that lake a little too long. In 2018, a boat having 17 passengers on it was completely flipped over, and 17 people were described as being thrown off the boat into the water. And fortunately, there was no casualties, but for some wind to be able to do that, that's some really strong wind. And so Blazek describes herself as being extremely distressed at this time because Nancy just never came back up, right? So she wound up paddling back to shore alone. And this is around midday, and that's about the time the winds are really going to pick up. Now, I do find it interesting that sources do not confirm where she returned to, whether she returned to a different pier or the same pier that the group launched from. That would be near San Marcos Laguna. However, eyewitnesses do confirm that she was clearly shaken, that she was met by Ramada, who had also returned to the shore by then, and this is the language I found used to describe Ramada, that he basically shielded her from onlookers, suggesting that he ushered her away before she had a chance to talk to anyone, basically rushing her back to the hotel. Things only get more frustrating from here, and you're about to see why. The group returned the kayaks, and from this point on, allegedly, clammed up, showing little interest in discussing what just happened. From what I read, they would not talk about this incident to anyone, and their actions to come will pretty much drive that point home for us. So, at this point, Eddie still hadn't paid for the kayaks that everyone used, and when it came time to share his contact info with the kayak rental, who were trying to help in this case, Eddie oddly wouldn't do it. Now, I do get that the group should have paid for these kayaks, but this was in the middle of a crisis. And of course, money should not be the focal point. Although, you give the information needed to save someone's life. Period. Someone that was part of your group, someone that you were specifically responsible for. Even someone that you in the future will claim is your friend and even like a sister. You try to help. But Eddie's hesitation to help search and rescue only made things worse. If anybody in this group cared about Nancy, as some of them claimed to do, then they would not have behaved this particular way. It's just so hard to imagine not doing everything you can. Something, oh my God, as simple as giving information to help find a person. But let's keep it moving because there's just a lot more. Just going on eyewitness accounts, After Christina returned to shore, Eddie immediately took her back to the hotel. She was seen crying, understandably shaken. And sometime later that evening, Christina and a few of the others went to the police station to file a report. Here's where things get murky, News outlets say Nancy's disappearance wasn't officially reported until 24 hours later. Now, that's only partially true because Christina, a participant, and 2 hotel owners did go to the police station shortly after it happened on the 19th. But the prosecutor, the person who actually investigates stuff like this, didn't find out about this until the 20th. So technically it was 24 hours before the authorities who mattered were in the loop. And from Nancy's disappearance, it wouldn't be until about 4 hours later did Eddie notify Nancy's family. His reason was he didn't have, her emergency contact, so he actually had to contact a prior retreat goer, and he wound up with her dad's phone number. And so he told him that way. But even then, the family described Eddie's call as being vague. Something to the effects of Nancy went out on the lake and disappeared. Sorry for your loss. Now, I admit I'm saying that kind of facetiously in a way. And after that, Eddie didn't have much to say. He simply asked where he could send Nancy's belongings, and that was that. Oh, he did say something. It almost felt like to appease the family for the moment. He said that Christina was at the police station filing a report and that the family would eventually get it. Now, what's strange is Eddie, as the retreat leader, didn't go to the police station himself. Of course, Nancy's family springs into action, right? Trying to organize a search and rescue. Now, the Guatemalan Navy, they did send a boat out on the 19th, but it was just one boat. And remember how big Lake Atitlán is. So that one boat, what is it doing? And after 72 hours, the search ended. We're never ever gonna know what kind of train wreck the Ng family is going through at this moment. The worry that they must have been feeling. So they're going to do anything that they can, right? And the closest people that they felt they needed to be in contact with was, of course, Eddie, the retreat leader, right? So Nancy's little sister, Nikki, she calls Eddie on the 20th. But this guy had already left. What Nikki was calling him to ask him to do was if he could stay longer and help, with the search mission. Nikki would say that sometimes it would take onwards of 4 hours just to get this guy before he would even call back, which definitely has to sting for a grieving family. The helplessness when you can't even contact the one person that could relieve at least just a small amount all this fear that you have. And the thing that stuck out in this interview that I watched with her sister and her brother was that Eddie even said that he was going to search for her like it was his own sister. And to that, I would say, fuck, man. I would not want to be Eddie's sister. There was witnesses that were with Eddie that saw Nikki's call come in and watched him turn his phone over because he just wanted to ignore it. Now, there's no way for us to confirm that, but if it is true, don't you think that says a lot? Nancy disappeared in the early afternoon of October 19th, and by 6 a.m. the next morning, that whole group, and I'm talking about all of them, the entirety of those retreat goer yoga people pants, had packed up and left for Guatemala City. Even though their itinerary said that they were to leave that day, okay? We have to mention that they wound up leaving hours before they should have. I think Eddie or Christina were scheduled to leave even later than that. So the two key people, Eddie and Christina, they could have stayed and they should have stayed. But they didn't stick around as points of contact, for these investigators. Instead, both of them left without even giving a statement to the prosecutors. When the prosecutor came looking for them on the 20th, they were already gone. I'm a big fan of common sense, and I think common sense dictates that these people stay no matter what. Even if they realize they didn't need to stick around, they should know they should stick around. This is not like somebody lost a bike, and get this, at least leave some contact info. But Eddie wouldn't. He wouldn't give it to the prosecutor. He wouldn't give Christina's number, simply stating that, hey, she already talked to the U.S. Embassy. I can't help anymore. Even something simple as sharing photos, because Eddie was the one snapping photos of this trip. He would not share that. He would not open his phone and just send a picture off to Nikki, say. And these were photos witnesses saw him take just before they launched off on the lake that day. Something like a photo like that, it might hurt, but there is a sense of connection as well when you see a loved one in what might have been their final photo. At least they would have known that, you know, she was happy beforehand. Besides all that, I mean, this photo could actually show what Nancy was wearing. I mean, if you think about it, if a body does turn up, maybe even an article of clothing washes ashore, at least the authorities will now know, hey, look at that picture. That's what Nancy was wearing. I think we're getting close to finding her. But he could not even do this. And it's unconscionable and very fishy. It's fishy, right, guys? Now, if we can't understand it, of course, Nancy's family could not understand this. Eddie and Christina's behavior is just bizarre, to say the least. If nothing criminal happened, why all the secrecy and why leave so quickly? All of this is alleged, of course. So the family's confusion would only grow. And 5 days after Nancy disappeared, they finally got the police report. And guess what? You know that statement Christina was supposed to have given the police that day? Well, it was missing from the report. The statement from the only witness that said she saw Nancy last was missing. And needless to say, her account is crucial. Getting this police report alone was an adventure in itself, okay? The Ng family had to hire a power of attorney just to get this report. And when it arrived, it didn't answer shit. There's another possibility of why her statement was omitted from the police report, and that is because if she actually had the statement in there, she would actually have to stay in Guatemala. Now, forget, she is an attorney herself, so she may know the law. From what I could find in the Googles, it isn't too hard to grease the palms of Guatemalan officials, especially the police. Now, if she knows about the Shakamo winds, she might have also, did a little research on Guatemalan law, which is very bizarre to look up. Now, once Christina gets back to the States, it's mum's the word, right? She's not talking to anybody. She's not even helping the family. And heartbreakingly, okay? Wait till you hear this. Christina has said she doesn't owe the family anything. If I were to put myself in the Ng family's shoes, I would be furious. I mean, yes, you don't owe this family anything, but don't you feel a sense of some type of obligation, just as a decent human being, to try at least a little? You don't owe it to them, but come on, you owe it to your soul, right? She's the only eyewitness to this alleged drowning. I keep doing this. This whole story is in quotes, and her help can make a real difference. She could point out the exact spot where it happened. Now, in your head was, wait, didn't she? Didn't she help at least point out where it happened? There's this one tiny boat, 5 dudes riding around in this gigantic lake. I think they need to be pointed in the exact direction. Now, there's a search team called Bruce's Legacy. Oh, something's falling. And they reached out, with questions to help guide their search. Of course, neither Christina nor her attorney responded. That's gotta be telling. That's gotta be so telling. Now, there's a fine gentleman named Chris Sharp, and he would lead the helicopter searches. And he just straight out says this has to be treated like a criminal case.
For me, this is now becoming a criminal investigation because the witnesses who were there at the material time have not been forthcoming.
He called out Christina Blazik by name for her lack of cooperation. Now, he was the first to publicly name her as the witness. Much credit to the Ng family. They are very respectful, okay? You can obviously see the daughter that they raised, that these are good people. And from the interviews I saw of their other siblings, this is a great family. And what they did was be very patient with everybody, giving everybody the benefit of the doubt. Maybe Christina was going through PTSD. It was a traumatic event. Eddie has his own things to balance, whatever. But you'll always come eventually to the wall, to the realization that you can't go any further because these people clearly are not trying to help. And the family did try to keep Christina Blazik's name out of the media to avoid, I guess, scaring her off. All they want is answers. All they want are the very simple answers only one person in this world can answer. When Christina finally made a statement, all right, it wasn't even her making the statement. It was through her attorney, okay? That's fine. She's an attorney. She knows how this works. She makes a statement through her attorney, and this is when the family first learned her version of events by watching TV. They watched it just like you and I would find out about this. So Christina's version of the story, very similar, right? They were together on the lake when Nancy decided to swim, despite all of Christina's warnings that it wasn't safe. Okay. After Nancy jumps in, Nancy's kayak, it started to float away. And when Christina turned to get it, she lost sight of Nancy. She says she paddled back to shore and sent for help. Christina's attorney insists that she's done everything she could, even saying she spoke with Guatemalan police and the FBI. The FBI did get involved and said there's no evidence of foul play. But Nancy's family feels that the Bureau, hasn't done a thorough enough job, saying that they only spoke with Eddie and Christina and not the other retreat goers. And Nancy's parents signed forms to let the FBI search her belongings, but nothing came of it. And the family feels completely let down by both the U.S. and Guatemalan authorities, To make it worse, the original prosecutor stopped communicating as well. And now the new prosecutor says there's nothing to be done because there's no evidence of a crime. Now, I also want to tell you that no one from the group reached out to Nancy's family with any detailed information, maybe what they experienced with Nancy on this trip, if she was happy, if she was sad. I'm sure the family would be grateful for any morsel of information, even if it doesn't help. The family attempted to contact Blazik on October 25 and 31, but nothing, not even a response, until her attorney's statement weeks later citing trauma. Guatemalan prosecutors noted in December 2023 that they had no official statement from Blazik or other participants as the group left before full cooperation. No international request for testimony had been processed via the U.S. Embassy, and Blazik's attorney claims she provided statements to Guatemalan police and the FBI, but the family disputes this due to the lack of records, even though there's 100+ pages in this case. Searching something like the Atitlán Lake is very challenging due to the very nature of the lake, right? Its depths and the conditions. Now, it began with an air search in October, followed by private helicopters, boats, and divers. Now, unfortunately, they could only reach 40 meters in a 30-meter deep lake. To us silly Americans, that's just 130 feet of an 11 100-foot lake. Drones would be hired by the family on October 24, and that would cover 95% of the lake. Now, like I mentioned before, the Guatemalan Navy halted efforts after 72 hours, okay, with no sign of Nancy beyond her empty kayak, and authorities ruled it as a drowning. But the case remains active and unsolved. The FBI themselves, they've been involved since late 2023, and homicide has not been ruled out, for them at least. And the case, in terms of Guatemalan law, won't be closed until the 10-year mark. Now, as of today, the family, led by Nancy's sister, Nikki, raised nearly, I do believe, $160,000. Roughly, this I'll put a screenshot of the GoFundMe, and this will go to the searches, and their travels to Guatemala. It's very pricey, and 160 grand at this point, that's going fast in a search like this. So the family has been going back and forth to Guatemala, to meet with prosecutors. Nothing is getting answered. If anything, they're just leaving with more questions and a lot more frustration at that. As of today, exactly 2 years from her disappearance, there's just no new leads or evidence otherwise. According to the most recent update of the family's GoFundMe, there will be another search in the early December of this year, 2025. They're going to attempt again. They can't do it now because of, the conditions are just too bad. They don't want to put anybody else's life in jeopardy, but it does continue. And in one line, it did say that they hope to find her body. So, that just tells you that they've come to grips with not having Nancy anymore. Now, I know this is needless to say, but the internet is going to do what the internet does. And basically, in a case like this, they're going to come up with all types of angles, their theories. They're going to come up with all types of theories. And I'm going to touch on a couple of these theories, but I do not want to get too into the weeds, so to speak, about conspiracy type stuff. The one theory that was burning up the Reddit threads as this story was unfolding was the foul play and murder angle. Okay, so some speculate that it was Blazik or others, within that group that caused a fatal injury to Nancy, right? Whether they pushed her, they just did something reckless, right? That maybe because of a dispute, something happened and Nancy died. And so they had to get rid of the body, and they made sure that she was at the bottom of Lake Atitlán. If it's a group effort or not can be in debate, but the group's unpaid kayaks, all of their swift departures, and how they pretty much unheeded all the subpoenas kind of suggests that this is some type of cover-up. Possibly with racial undertones. I don't subscribe to this, okay? I'm just telling you guys what I read, okay? Because Nancy was the only Asian there, it kind of, probes into the fears of Asian hate, in a sense, or simply just a betrayal within, yoga, something that's a communal bond between these people. Something went wrong. I can't imagine her saying anything so out of pocket that it would lead to this. So that's a theory, and I don't subscribe to this one. Then there was this really completely creepy theory, okay? So, and this would target the leader of this group, Eduardo Ramada, that this yoga retreat was more than just doing downward dogs and stretches, right? That this was just a full-blown sex cult. And these retreats, they were simply for recruiting, and the only person, not to play ball was Nancy Ng. Now, Ramada would miscalculate, Nancy and make a sexual pass at her, and advance, only to get rejected. Well, as the theory goes, you don't reject Ramada, and he has it out for Nancy. So he sends his right hand, and that is Christina Blazik. Tells her to take Nancy out, separate from the group, and make sure she's at the bottom of the lake when she comes back. And when she does come back, she is completely shaken by this ordeal because she's just following orders, right? Now, whether she's acting or not, we don't know. But as witnesses describe, Ramada is shielding her from prying eyes and just escorts her back to the hotel. Okay, so I'm not in that camp either. Okay, Nancy drowning from an impulsive need to swim that day isn't readily accepted, in a bizarre case like this. And I totally get that, right? There's just too much strange behavior. Okay, Nancy saying that her phone will be set to airplane mode the whole trip plays into the vibe that this is a disconnection from our already too hyper-connected world, and now we're reconnecting back with nature, right? That's the energy here, and because of this, right, how there's no devices, nobody's just actively out there vlogging this adventure. It just adds another layer of mystery, because there's just no digital footprints besides some scant videos of her waving at a camera. That's all I could find, at least. So if you're not subscribed to this being an accidental drowning, then you're left with a lot of fishy looking behavior. Because why the conflicting reports on something like a life jacket? Why the rapid departure without cooperation with the local police? Why didn't they just at least pay for their kayaks? Those kinds of things all makes us raise an eyebrow, at the one person, the man, that should have taken care of all these things. The one that is responsible for the group, Eduardo Ramada. But that's a deep dive that I personally will not undertake because there is just not enough to go on. I will say that he looks suspicious as all hell, but that's just my opinion. This whole case is just very frustrating, right? And I'm not speaking for the family or anything because I can't imagine the type of frustration that they're going through. So I'm just going to leave it at that. What I am going to do is pretty much offer up the most basic scenario. Okay, so the dangerous thing that I read about Lake Atitlán was that there was really no reliable shallow parts of the water. So you could just be walking on the shores and suddenly you'd be sinking, to some ungodly depths. And it's simply because it was made from a collapsed volcano 85,000 years ago. And as you can imagine, that pretty much left the lake, bottom pretty chaotic. Nancy was a proficient swimmer from what I could gather. If she was willing to kayak without a life vest, I would hope that she was a very strong swimmer. I will just say I know how to swim. If I was walking on water that suddenly had like this major plunge in it, it's possible I might panic. I might get discombobulated, not know where I am, and I could actually drown in a scenario like that. I could see that. Blazik said Nancy jumped into the water, which pushed her kayak back. Now, that statement in itself is not very specific, right? So we don't know if she dove headfirst or if she just jumped feet first. And we have to remember that the irregular topography of this lake means that the flooring greatly varies. Now, what if Nancy jumped in thinking it was the deep part, but then hit her head, on some type of strange protrusion of sorts, and it knocked her unconscious? I looked up what the human body does if unconscious underwater, and I found out that she would almost certainly sink. And it was already approaching midday when Nancy jumped in, which coincided with the onset of, those winds, around 11 a.m. Direct waves and turbulence doesn't necessarily, hold a person down underwater, but a distressed person could lose their sense of direction. Here's the crazy thing. If the water in a lake was warm, Nancy's body would have floated within 3 to 7 days. But this is Lake Atitlán, and its depths They have cold layers, it said, and currents makes it actually probable that she could remain submerged, perhaps forever. The currents could have dragged her body or snagged it on something underneath there. We don't know what's going on, right? Or even beneath some type of formation that occurred, when the lake was formed. Now, it's hard to tell what's under 1,000 feet of cold, murky lake. And since we don't know that, we'll just leave that part as that. Now, here is something else that I read. It is very possible that when Nancy jumped into the water, it was just the sheer cold of the water, giving her a shock and disallowing her lungs for air retention. From that point, she'd sink like a stone, and now she's gonna panic, right? And also she's gonna start inhaling. And so as she's inhaling more and more water, as more water is flooding her lungs, basically, this just accelerates her sinking. And I will say this aligns with the accidental drowning theory, but that still doesn't rule out why everybody was acting so... They're just acting fucked up in this story, right? And we can never ignore that. It's just strange behavior. I don't even know if the people from that group that are not specifically named or even said to be involved have contacted the Ings thus far. And if they haven't, there's something wrong here. There's something really wrong with these people's moral compass, or they just feel no type of obligation. They literally abandoned one of their members and just went home. And to me, that sounds cult-like. If one man could pretty much round up his group, make them pack up, and leave one of them behind, one of their own, just out there without staying to figure out where she is. I guess that'll always be the giant question mark in this case. But anyways, guys, now you know the case of Nancy Ing. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. I love conversing with you guys. Thumbs up is all I ask if you enjoyed this video. And now that you know the story of Nancy, go give somebody in your family a big kiss, a loud I love you, because I'm pretty sure the Ing family would just love to tell Nancy one more time what she meant to them. So go protect the ones that you love, and don't forget to love the ones that protect you.